I have the privilege today of hosting this particular panel. You may just have joined us as I just watched the participants creep in. So let me just let you, oh, lots of you here. So I don't want to, Carolyn, jump the gun at all. So I could sing a song, but that may not fall within any global ESG principles with which any of us are familiar. I'm not sure human rights abuses are covered by ESG, but that would be one of those things. The numbers seem to be stabilizing just a little bit. We are on time. So to honor those of you who are with us exactly on time, my name is Bruce Whitfield. I am a journalist. I work in South Africa. I've had the privilege of watching the work of Mervyn King for many, many years as a global leader in corporate governance. And today I'm going to be introducing him to you wearing a brand new hat. Today, the format is deadly simple. We're going to ask Mervyn to address us this morning, Professor Mervyn King. We will then throw the entire platform open to your questions, and I'd appreciate some brief questions in the chat box if you would, and tell us to whom you would like the question addressed, and I will do my best over the next hour to facilitate that for you this morning. I was fortunate enough, and you know, when somebody has been to the World Economic Forum in Davos, a bit like somebody who has just completed their MBA, they will tell you again and again, unprompted. This year was particularly interesting, not from all the usual sort of reporting around private aircraft and everything else, but it was a much smaller gathering because it was done in summer in Switzerland. But one got this very palpable sense of fear in the world, like nothing I have seen since the 2008 financial crisis. Rising global interest rates leading to higher, rising global interest rates as a result of higher inflation, as a result partly of supply chain disruptions from around the globe, which have caused huge contraction in many economies, of course, during the year 2020, and many are bumbling out of that. There's been this huge recovery in other economies, but there are large swathes of the world that are still struggling in a post-pandemic world. Plus, of course, we're finally beginning to feel the sense of hangover from the huge inflation of global economies that happened in 2008, 2009, and of course, then more recently through the crisis of 2020. It's been a really, really difficult time, and the chickens finally are coming home to roost. At least from a financial perspective, we've come from a period of abundance and we're going into a period of scarcity, and that puts huge pressure on corporations around the world, of course, who are expected to reach a ESG compliance of their obligations in terms of ESG and to do it in a hurry. Climate change hasn't slowed down. Social issues have been exacerbated. Of course, as Melinda Gates put it just in the early stages of the pandemic, saying that this pandemic has accentuated all of the inequalities that already existed in society. So there are huge issues to discuss today, and I see just out of my eye line lots of commentary coming through. So we'll pick up on your questions as and when they happen. Allow me to introduce your panel to you this morning. It's weird hours of the day all over the globe, so we're very grateful to have our panelists joining us from almost everywhere on the planet. We have got Professor Mervyn King. He's got a CV this long, which would take us till 9 o'clock to get through South African time, but a global leader in corporate governance. He's lent his name to the corporate governance standards in South Africa, the principles-based corporate governance standards. He's had a real impact on the planet in terms of thinking on leadership and the way in which companies should be run, triple bottom line reporting, and now is today already the founding patron of the ESG Exchange. He will have a moment to chat to you in a moment. Harvey Broadman is joining us from the United States. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. He is chair of the ESG Exchange Governing Council. He's a global economist, a presidential advisor, amongst others. Hella Bank Jorgensen is also in the United States. He's chair of the ESG Advisory Committee. Then Peter Duffy is the chair of the Technical Committee, and then Carolyn Chambers, sitting in South Africa, is chief executive of the Good Governance Academy. That is your panel today. Those are the people to whom we would appreciate you directing questions as we go through the morning session. But Professor Mervyn King, why don't we hand over to you first?
Thank you very much, Bruce, for your introduction. And thank you to my fellow panelists for getting up so early in the morning. I hope you're not wearing a pair of pajamas, Howard, pants. But today I want to talk about the what, the who, and the how. What we're going to talk about is sustainability reporting. And I want to take you back to 1987 when the Brundtland Commission, founded by the United Nations, held its hearings on the adverse impacts on planet Earth, particularly by limited liability companies. And the well-known finding there was that there were adverse impacts on planet Earth for people, planet, and prosperity. And these were the critical issues for sustainable development long term. By the end of the 20th century, turning into the 21st century, the makeup of the market cap of companies on major stock exchanges in the world, like the S&P 500, New York, London, Johannesburg as well, a peculiar thing was happening. Only about 20% of the makeup of the market cap of companies was being reflected as additives in a balance sheet according to financial reporting standards. This was alarming, and the International Federation of Accountants met with me at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva. I happened to have been the chairman of the United Nations at that time on governance. And there were also two senators from America at that meeting. And they were concerned that there should be some reporting by the company on this 80% of value. Otherwise, were we really discharging our duty of accountability? And the answer was clearly in the negative. And so the Global Reporting Initiative, as its name indicates, it was an initiative. And the initiative was to give guidance to management as to how to report on this 80% of value, which was not reflected in a balance sheet according to standards that existed at that time and still exist. The who had to draw this up, of course, was management. Management got the approval of their corporate reports from the board. The board got assurance from the International Assurance and Auditing Standards Board, and that went out to the users who could draw conclusions about the long-term health of the company from that. Well, it was clearly not sufficient. Financial reporting on its own was critical, but not sufficient. Sustainability reporting, critical now, but on its own, without the numbers, clearly not sufficient. So again, a meeting of the world's great financial institutions and some great practitioners like Unilever, HSBC, etc., the World Bank, IFAC, and United Nations, it was called the Eminent Persons Group on Governance and Oversight, and the GRI, which by this time had been established, setting out guidelines as to how to report on these sustainability issues, as they were called. And I said that this reporting now in two silos was divorced from reality, because these things are integrated 24/7. Operationally, when you're using natural assets or plant and machinery, they work together. They're not separate. And we should integrate these. A4S, trust founded by His Royal Highness Prince Charles, argued that they were connected. I pointed out that the etymology of the word connected was to link, whereas the etymology of the word integrated was a system. And what we needed was a system of reporting, a system to link, yes, the so-called non-financial information and the financial information, integrate them put them into a system. And the word integrated won the day, and we launched the International Integrated Reporting Council at St. James's Palace. Well, that was the what and the who. Management now was starting to report on in an integrated manner, tying together the financial and the so-called non-financial. Asset managers and asset owners around the world were reading these reports, and from them concluding the quality of management and the board, and to see that they were thinking on an integrated manner, not as we did in my younger days as director and chairman of companies on the London Stock Exchange, Europe, and here. We thought in silos. And now we were starting to integrate. And from the integrated report, which was a comprehensive report on how we were creating value, preserving value, or eroding it, and if we were eroding it, what was our plan to eradicate or ameliorate this erosion? Well, it became dominant, this question of ESG, as it was translated into environmental, societal, and governance. And there were some seismic events towards the end of the first decade of the 21st century. I'll just deal with one, the collapse of Lehman Brothers. It had a huge impact on a company's financial condition, its balance sheet. It had a huge impact on its operating performance, its income statement, its balance, its cash flow. It had a huge impact on its risk profile, its cost of capital. And suddenly sustainability was seen as a coin to have two sides. There was the inside out, what happened inside a company, how you made the product, what were your outputs, and when your product went out into society, what were the impacts on those three critical dimensions of Brundtland for sustainable development? But there were also these three critical dimensions having a huge impact on the company. Well, SASB was formed, Sustainability Accountancy Standards Board. We at the IRC, because I became chairman of the IRC, said that there had to be collaboration because there was a myriad now standard setters and framework providers. And at London in about March 2019, I was fortunate enough as chair of the IRC to address these executives of all these standard setters and framework providers around the world. And I said, it's a moral and social outrage that you see yourself as competitors when you're actually driving to the same end. What are we looking for? We're trying to achieve a global comprehensive corporate reporting system. And we need to be collaborating. And SDG 17 is collaboration. And we should be focusing on that. Well, I'm told that it had some impact on some executives, but I think the trigger was really the pandemic, when these executives saw scientists in 9 months achieve a vaccine, which usually took 9 years. And they themselves started collaborating. And there was a collaboration of the group of 5, which included the IRC and SASB. And inevitably, this collaboration led to merger. SASB and the IRC merged, and we called ourselves the Value Reporting Foundation. But there was a grander plan, and that was to be acquired by the IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards. And we were. The IFRS, through a consultation process, formed a new global body, the International Sustainability Standards Board, in which the enterprise value creation reporting standards on ESG issues went into there. And the IR framework went up into the IFRS. The IFRS is a monitoring body, an oversight body, and they couldn't evolve the framework. So I suggested to the Technical Readiness Working Group, put ownership down to the IASB and its new sibling, the ISSB, jointly, and they could be the owners of the framework. Well, that is what happened. And by the end of June, which is in a few days' time, the IFRS will announce the final creation of the ISSB and the general disclosure for its standards and a exposure draft on climate change standards. Well, that's the what. And you start seeing a complication when you think of the European sustainability reporting standards, where they have included the inside out and the outside in their standards called double materiality. Whereas SASB, whereas the VRF and the ISSB has said, well, if there's something material in the inside out, we should include it because maybe Bruce, as a user, will come to a different conclusion with that extra information. So interoperability was coined. And then the question that there was dynamic materiality, where you were sitting on the fence, as it were, to decide what was material and what goes in and what stays out of the report. Because the more informed your corporate reporting is, the more transparent is your accountability. Well, that's the what, which, as you can hear, is very confused state still. And the SEC in America is still issuing directives. The who is management. They've got a draw, the board approves, and the external auditor assures. So the question is, with the what and the who is how. How do practitioners now do these so-called sustainability reports, which are in fact ESG reports? And what do the regulators in Kenya decide? They're following the IASB under the IFRS, but the IFRS is a private sector unit, cannot mandate to countries around the world. So that jurisdiction may decide in that developing country that the double materiality standards of sustainability reporting of the EU is more appropriate for their country. So more confusion will reign amongst the different associations of accountants. And consequently, in the Good Governance Academy, of which I'm the patron and Carolyn is the chief executive, the Good Governance Academy I founded because in my travels around the world, as Bruce has indicated, at universities and business schools and advising boards around the world, I knew that they saw these things differently, that they were taught differently. And I wanted to marry SDG 4, education, with SDG 17, collaboration. And it was formed 3 years ago. And with much pride, I can tell you that Carolyn and I now have 5 million accountants and directors in 135 countries following the colloquia and the articles of the GGA. And it's that body that has formed the initiative of the ESG Exchange. The how. How are we going to do this? How does Bruce Whitfield, who wakes up in the morning and a country has mandated EVC reporting, say, well, where do I start? And how do I learn this? Where do I find the content? And how do I report it? Well, that's why in forming the ESG Exchange, we got a collaborative group of the leaders in standard setting and in practicing reporting. And the names can be mentioned during this webinar, but they are leaders around the world, and they've agreed to become members of the technical committee and the advisory committee, and they will form the content and show how to do it. So the ESG Exchange is how to, and Pedro will be drawing up, and I use that word, which has become my favorite word these days, a playbook, which will show content and show how to do this sustainability reporting around the world. And it will have oversight through Hella and Harry. So it's with some pride, Bruce, that we launched today the ESG Exchange, which will be a global body with these global leaders, knowledgeable leaders, giving content in the playbook and how to actually report on these matters. So you will have under the IFRS a system of reporting, financial, sustainability reporting or ESG reporting, and connected, linked, the link between the financial and non-financial, and integrated to show that the company has done integrated thinking in its operations and how it made its product. So it is an exciting time for corporate reporting and corporate governance, and I'm proud to be the patron of the GGA. Thank you, Bruce.
Irvin, thank you very, very much indeed. And what an extraordinary sense of achievement there must be after a lifetime of focus on changing global thinking on reporting standards. And that there are lots of tributes coming through, and we're not going to pay, we'll let them look at the messages about that afterwards. Can we focus your wonderful messages, which have come from places like Istanbul, from Bondi Beach, there's no need to show off, from places, even people who admit to coming from places like Pretoria. There's Nigeria. There were so many places. I made scribbles and notes and things and can't read my own handwriting, but really it's wonderful to have such global representativity here today. It really is good to have you all. If you could focus, please, the column on questions, keep them nice and brief, that would be greatly appreciated. As I go around the table and just get a sense from everybody, Elon Musk, not everybody's cup of tea, but he is still, I think, the richest person in the world, and has become the richest person in the world through some really interesting thinking and then acting on that thinking and the creation particularly of Tesla. I once was watching a talk of his online about the issue of sustainability, and he made a very, very simple analogy. If something is if something is sustainable, great. The opposite of sustainable is not sustainable, unsustainable. Why would you want to do something that is unsustainable? It makes no logical sense whatsoever. And he built this principle of Tesla. We'll see whether it stands the test of time in terms of sustainability and the way in which it runs its business. But here's Tesla, which is built on this principle of sustainability, saying carbon fuels are unsustainable. Why would you continue to make motor cars around the world, millions of the things every single year that spew out toxins into the atmosphere, when battery-operated cars should, in theory, alleviate that pressure? A perfectly logical chain of events, but nobody was doing it until one manufacturer took it seriously, made it very attractive to human beings to want to own those particular products, and suddenly the rest of the world is being forced to play catch up. Sometimes it takes a single catalyst, and in the case of the ESG Exchange, this, we hope, will be that catalyst. Just a few thoughts from around the table. Carolyn, let's start with you as Chief Executive. Let's get a perspective, please, from you as to this big thinking on the future.
Thank you, Bruce. I think people underestimate how much effort this takes. This is not an easy task. Certainly the big audit firms around the world are putting a lot of money into upskilling their staff and employing new staff and getting expertise in. I think if there's one thing I can leave the audience with today is to consider the deep changes that are required within an organization to be able to not only become more sustainable with the emerging threats that we see around the world, but also to report on their sustainability activities. So it is a lengthy process. This is not an easy task. And Paddy can tell you, the changes in the EU in pushing back their deadlines to allow companies to start the process. So if I can say anything, it's not only do we need to know how, but we need to start soon. So it's a double-edged sword for most organizations. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Carolyn. Paddy, you were mentioned, so let's go to you next.
Sure. As Carolyn said, ESG is horrendously complex. The E topics, the S topics, the G topics, they've all got different taxonomies. They've all got different units of measurement. And organizations are now required to effectively find a way of reporting on all the things that matter most to the performance over the longer term of their organizations. And doing that in a world which is growing in uncertainty is difficult at the best of times. But now, particularly in the EU and other parts of the world following, we have a very, very tough but necessary regimen of standards. And organizations will need to report on the state of health of their organizations, not just through the narrow financial lens, as Mervyn pointed out earlier on, as was the case recently, and still technically currently. But they need to report on the health of their organizations through all the lenses that matter most to all stakeholders. And stakeholders now include the millennials that are in the workforce, our future leaders, our customers, the financiers, and to Mervyn's point, again, with regards to what gave rise, we've had ESG and sustainability as a topic, as a matter of concern for some considerable time now. But the thing that caused it to accelerate in global awareness and understanding at the level of the average citizen is COVID. Because the global funds, the pension funds in particular, to coin a phrase, to borrow the term from the chair of BlackRock, sustainability and ESG is not woke capitalism. It is just good old common sense business. If organizations are expected to thrive over the longer term, and it's getting more difficult, investors want to know more about what matters most to customers, to those folk working inside and outside of those organizations. It is tough, but that's where we are today. If we're to be effective stewards of organizations with an eye not just towards our self-interest, but the interest of future generations, our grandchildren, we have an obligation, we have a duty. We must do this, get it right.
Thank you, Peter. Helle?
Well, thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, etc. to all of you. And thanks for those words, Bruce. I will say, when you kind of like talk about the good Elon Musk, this is also about comparability. This is about that we can take all of these reports and compare, so no one will go out and say ESG is a scam or anything else. So we take away the greenwashing, we take away the green wishing. We start making companies resilient, but also make sure that we show that to the whole world. And I think, some of you on here will know that I've been on this journey for 30 years, and I've seen so many companies using so much money, so much time, so much effort, and not necessarily having the outcome that they could have. So the whole idea, and why I'm honored that King and everyone asked me to be here, is that this is something where we'll start to see the resilience of companies come through, but through connected working, right? That we have this integrated reporting thinking, that we can start put this together And therefore, as I think someone is saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We need to go fast and we need to go far. So actually, I think by having all of these fantastic people from all around the world working together, we will both go fast and far, and we'll save companies money and time, and we will get to a better result.
Thank you, Helen. Harry Broughton.
Well, I think this conversation is extremely important. I think what many folks don't understand is that the standards governing sustainability reporting or ESG reporting are continually changing, and companies and other entities who are reporting have to keep up with those standards. And what the ESG Exchange is an independent entity that will help companies keep up with those standards by reporting rigorously and adhering to those standards. And there's no other entity out there that really provides this kind of service. And as Mervyn and others have said, we are global and we are interdisciplinary, and our role is to help integrate, but also to provide a forum between the standard setters, the users, the interest groups, to come together and make sure that these reports are actually meaningful. And so we are very much of a hands-on organization that will help entities be rigorously adhering to these standards so they actually make a difference. And so I'm delighted to be chairing the governing council of this organization, because I think we have a great deal of hope of making a difference.
Harry, let's go to, Helen picked up a comment from Theo Molefe in the timeline here saying, oh, interesting choice to quote Elon Musk. He's highly quotable because most of the time he's looking for attention and gets attention. ESG is a scam, he said, and possibly not wrong in the way in which many people think about ESG, accentuating the importance of getting a global standard, Harry, and to give it the credibility that ESG so desperately needs. So we're not going off in 10,000 different directions all the time, giving people like Musk oxygen.
That's exactly correct. And I think what people are coming to realize is, in the end, the capital markets are watching companies. And the ability to raise capital, the ability to deploy capital, the ability to hire workers in the right kinds of occupations that help them grow, help them prosper, help making sure that the environment for their children is cleaner than it was for us. That to me is an incredibly important metric by which companies are going to be measured, and investors are going to make decisions about where to deploy their capital. And that ultimately is what we're trying to bridge. We're trying to integrate the capital markets and the actual product markets and the producing end of the business community.
Mervyn King, we're seeing a huge polarization of politics around the world. We're seeing a dislocation in the same way as the global economy seems to be dislocating. There's a lot of talk of deglobalization, and that brings forward a whole new host of challenges. But we're also seeing really divisive politics developing. There was a question to Ray Dalio in Davos saying, what are the odds of America going into a civil war? And there was this collective intake of breath in the room as people looked and went, what? That's a silly question. And Dalio went, oh, about 50-50. And it was this weird sort of sense of, hold on a second, he's probably wrong, we hope. We hoped that we were wrong about Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine as well 6 months ago. The world is increasingly divisive. Michael in Australia is talking about the fact that there's been a new government in Australia, a more sympathetic government. And Michael, paying tribute to you, saying we've got a meeting with Prime Minister Albanese in the next couple of weeks, thanks to you, Mervyn. But the politics of ESG is as important in a really fractured world, Mervyn King.
It's fractured, Bruce. If you go back to the 20th century and the middle of the 19th century, we as directors focused on increasing the wealth of shareholders. And the belief was increase wealth at the top and trickle down to the impoverished at the bottom. As we all know, that trickle became treacle and it stuck at the top, did not come down. And the thinking has changed completely. So, for example, at my university, so 3 years ago, I started a new course at the School of Accountancy on the Chief Value Officer, a book I wrote in 2016. That really the accountant today, the Chief Financial Officer, doesn't only deal with making sure that the financial statements are drawn according to the IASB standards. He or she is a value officer because he has to start looking at how the company is creating value. People must remember that companies were created by society for society in the middle of the 19th century because wealthy people were not prepared to give money anymore to unlimited liability companies where they were liable for the debts of creditors and the employees when the business failed. And so the representative society, the government of the day in Massachusetts, in the UK, said, we will create an artificial person that's incapacitated, but has got limited liability. You'll give $100 and we'll give you hard copy, today it's electronic, certificate showing that you've got a piece of the business, but that's the end of your liability. The concomitant to that was when the business failed, you went to the back of the line. Creditors are first, and then there were secured creditors, et cetera. And only then, if there was residual value, did the shareholders get any money. So today, in answer to your question, the mindset, I got an award from the International Federation of Accountants in 2012 for changing the thinking of the accountancy profession forever. That it's no longer thinking just on the numbers. You've got to think of value, looking at this myriad of issues, environmental, social, and governance issues, which were making up the bulk of the market cap of companies around the world. And so today, the question is the company creating value for society? And society asks, how is the company making its money? Is the company's increased profit being subsidized by society and the environment, as many companies were in the 20th and early 21st century? And if they are, then they're not adding value to society. They're subtracting value from society. So politicians can be politicians, but society mindsets have changed. They want to see responsible corporate citizens. They want these companies which have been formed as platforms for raising capital and also for creating jobs, but to do it in a sustainable manner. To agree with Elon Musk, what's the good of doing it in an unsustainable manner? Then you've got a business which is not going to continue. So if the trustee of your pension fund, Bruce, invests your money in that company, well, he's not discharging his duty of care to you. So the question of the long-term health of companies has become critical to society. And society today values companies. They're the values. They see where the value is. The customer will move away from a company that has built a new factory on a riverbank and discharging its waste into the river. It won't buy its products anymore. It won't buy its products if they haven't been monitoring their major service suppliers and service providers and suppliers of goods in the supply chain. Why? Because we know it's happened. When it's found out that a company listed on the London Stock Exchange, that a major service provider is using child labor, they lose 40% of market cap the next day. So there is a change, complete change in answer to that question, that society starts valuing companies today.
Thank you, Mervyn, very much. Hello, lots of questions around this issue, and you raised the point about the cost of ESG and saying that ESG will save companies money. There are several sort of suggestions that this is yet another compliance exercise that simply will end up costing lots and lots of money, probably in the beginning. That is true. There's a huge amount of money being invested, $1 billion each by Deloitte and PwC to train staff, to get people up to speed. It's a significant investment in the future. Just talk to me, please, about the concept of ESG in the long term actually being a cost-effective mechanism. Just lots of accountants online, they need to know.
Well, I'm an accountant too, Bruce. So totally transparent here. See, if it's an afterthought, if we only see this as compliance, if we only say, okay, we need to comply with this, let's, after the fact, collect the numbers, put them out there, check mark, yes, that's a cost. Of course, that's a cost. If we look at what is really that helps the company, helps the leadership, and many of you here knows that I train board of directors and executives and investors on many of these issues. If we look at it up front, if we understand not to think in silos, if we understand how all of these is integrated, if we take the guesswork out of all of the things we do, that's when we start not only saving money, because this is not only money we're talking about, we're actually saving all of the externalities that we all put out every single day, because we start managing what we are measuring. But we need to measure the right things. So that's where we have the ISSB, all of these standards, figuring out what are all of these things, and of course the corporations themselves. Then what we ESG Exchange will help with is the how, is the, instead of everyone sits and figure out, okay, how do I do this myself? Now we are collaborating on that playbook or whatever we should call on, how do we do this in the most efficient, effective, both from a cost effective point of view, but also from a resource point of view. So back to your points on, yes, we are unfortunately heading into something that looks like a recession, in many places, inflation, etc. If we can take away the cost of a lot of guesswork, if we can take away a lot of cost for people that have to sit and figure out all of this by themselves, if we can give time, because doing it together, we go further, faster, then that is not a cost. That is actually something that can be used internally, both of the company, the board of directors, and of course, all the stakeholders. And then we get to the point where we can compare, and therefore you don't need to sit and say, oh, where are we on a very innovative person, like where you mentioned the good Elon Musk. But we need to make sure we can compare all of these different things. And that's what we're going to work on.
Thank you, Hella. And of course, Harry, I mean, time is of the essence. Simply, there are quite a few questions around credibility. And because lots of people are sort of fishing in the dark on this thing, it's undermining ultimately the credibility of the anagram of ESG. Speed is of the essence to get the standards out and to get a global reporting standard.
Speed is of the essence, but equally importantly, and unlike auditing, financial reporting, this reporting is not just backward looking, but prospective. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. It's quite different from financial reporting. And while it might be seen as a compliance matter, it's compliance in terms of becoming a better performing entity, a better performing company that, as I said before, capital markets will think of companies very differently than they do today by how they are reporting and what they are reporting on. We see this every single day, and they're going to be judged. The reports are going to be judged by their credibility. And that's what we're trying to do through the ESG Exchange, is making sure that these reports are not just backward looking, but forward looking, but also credible. And that is the name of the game. And we're going to be judged not just by today, but by future generations about how companies are performing on the E, on the S, and on the G.
Thank you, Harry, very much. I think this one, Peter, will be well addressed to you from Claude Kamangirira, saying that with the growing prominence of ESG reporting requirements on companies, what measures are standard setters implementing to mitigate greenwashing? And I think Mervyn used the term green wishing as well. Peter?
Well, effectively, it's about metrics and targets, right? ESG is a data monster with a voracious appetite. And in Europe in particular, but elsewhere across the world, there's significant specificity in the context of the metrics required in the E across the range of E topics. The S topics are not so much kind of metrics as kind of narrative disclosures, and similarly in the G. And there's a way of calibrating all of that. There's a way of normalizing all of that, such that you can gather information from across the entirety of your organization, present it, cleanse it, structure the information, such that it is verifiable, such that the third-party independent assurance providers can come in and verify that what you're saying is true, and then report. And I think in the context of that greenwashing piece, and this is a segue very much into what exactly and what practically are we going to be doing in the ESG Exchange? Through this global collaboration, structured shared learning, led largely by corporates, not academics or standard setters, we're looking very clearly at the big and basic fundamental things that, regardless of regulatory context and where you are geographically in the world, there are 5 big and basic things which you need to understand. We organize these things in a thing called the ESG Value Stack. But when you look at them very carefully through the lenses of 5 corporate personas, the board, their needs and wants, those folk led by the CEO, those folk led by the finance function, and shortly, largely thanks to the writings and the thinking and leadership of Professor Mervyn King. But the CFO function, that title going forward, is like to change to Chief Value Officer. Then middle management, and finally those folk that have to communicate to the outside world. The intersection of the value stack through the lenses of those 5 different corporate personas, you end up seeing all of the dots that need to be joined. Because reporting is what we're talking about here. But the point really is, how do you affect organizational change? How do you get that dial to move? It's relatively easy to write a standard. It's quite a different challenge to affect that, to operationalize that through complex organizations that are spread across geographies. And the business of the ESG Exchange is about creating an environment where corporates will share with each other what's working for them in terms of gathering the data, sensing it, sorting it, structuring it, such that it becomes decision useful and so forth. So effectively, what the standards, in answer to your questions, what they've done is they've provided effectively frameworks and standards and language that allow us to create a new method of measuring. And through that, effectively, over time, it won't happen overnight, eliminating greenwashing and greenwishing.
Peter, thank you very much. A further question there, Carolyn, and I think this one's probably best directed at you, is there is a huge shortage of ESG professionals in the world, because suddenly we're creating standards, we're creating measurable metrics, and who's going to do all the work? And we have various questions also on, can we get a title, please? Like chartered accountants can get the CASA or the CFA, the CTA, whatever it might be. People want to be recognized for their expertise, and so they'd like a qualification and they would like a title to show how clever they are. Where do we stand on that one, Carolyn?
Bruce, I think recently we've seen lots of ESG and sustainability expert titles pop up on LinkedIn. So everybody's suddenly an ESG expert. But in in reality, there are not enough to go around. And that's exactly what the ESG Exchange is trying to do, is through its global collaboration, is make this scarce body of expertise available and accessible to more than just those people in the various countries and in the various disciplines. So the ESG Exchange is really about bringing the multidisciplinary approach, because everybody's involved in an organization around ESG. And it's also about a global approach to it. I think in terms of getting a designation or a certification, that is something that will be achieved through the ESG Exchange playbook. It's important for people to not only spend the time and gain this understanding, but also to be recognized and rewarded for the time that they've spent. It's a basic human nature to get that to want that recognition. And certainly part of our program includes international certification through an international certification body. And I know the question's going to be, and what about in my country? The certification is written so that it can be registered with any of the qualifications authorities in the various countries. And you know, we can follow the process, but of course that's going to be demand driven. International certification as a first step is where we're starting, and it is important that we get some kind of a baseline, a base level. That being said, we can't have these designations that are static. This world is changing. It's fast moving. We don't even have the standards yet, and we're trying to deliver against them. So we're going to have to, against that certification, ensure that we've got some kind of a continuing professional development, but not in a static, stagnated way that we have today. I mean, isn't it a grudge these days to have to attend a webinar to get your certification, stamped? So we're not going to do it that way. Rather, through our interactive knowledge portal, we're going to be engaging people and rewarding them for their time spent in engaging the content and engaging with each other on the portal, using some gamification tools and leaderboards. So you can get your recognition through actually engaging, as opposed to sitting back and doing something else while the webinar is playing in the background, just so that you can tick it off.
So Zamira just says, to clarify, will the exchange be offering an accredited certification?
Yes, it will. So it will be on a process. The program itself is 5 modules, and it's not an education program. So let me just clarify that. This program takes 3 years to complete. It's a 12-quarter program and 5 modules. So we're not just training, because the world doesn't need more education on this. The world needs action. So it is an immersive learning, absolutely, but it's an immersive learning about instilling in an organization the operational capabilities as well as organizational competencies. That's very important. And over and above that, we need to make sure that at the end of the program, the organization is left with an effective management system for sustainability information that is continually improving, because the world is changing. So yes, there's an accredited certification. It is accredited with an international organization called APMG International, which is loosely aligned with the Oxford University. There are 3 international certification bodies around the world, and this is the one that we have chosen, is APMG International. So yes, it will be an international accredited certification.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Carolyn. I want to go around the table and just do a little wrap up. Somebody suggested we call the person in charge of ESG the corporate consciousness officer. And I wonder how we stop. My wife's great-grandfather was a very bad Catholic. And whenever the priest knocked on the front door, he'd jump out the back window and disappear down the road and down the alley and wouldn't be seen for days. You don't want chief executives running away from the ESG specialist in the business, do we, Harry? So, I mean, this is a deadly serious And maybe this is where we can wrap up and start with you, Harry. This is deadly serious stuff. This is 50 years from now. Our grandchildren are going to be asking, why did they do nothing? They knew it was coming. They knew the world was breaking, and they did nothing. And I suppose that's the big question we all face now is, as companies, as entities, we've got to take this stuff deadly seriously. It's been building for a long time, and there is no time like the present.
Yeah, the 50 years is today.
Yeah.
And if companies, if shareholders, workers, customers believe that this is something to be accredited for down the road, I think they're sadly mistaken. As I said, the capital markets are judging today how companies are behaving. Boards are being judged by how they're overseeing the companies. This is not a static concept. I think what's very important to understand is what we're doing through the ESG Exchange and ESG generally is a business transformation tool. And it's not going to be an accreditation that's good for 1 year. This is going to be dynamic accreditation because the standards are going to change. The reporting is going to change. And as I said earlier, this is not just backward reporting, but it's prospective reporting. So this is very much a dynamic process that we're undergoing. And I think it's very important that people understand that. It's not to be the analog of financial reporting. This is outside the realm of pure finance.
Thank you very much, Harry. Hella, thought from you?
I think, and I've been following the questions and the comments here, and I'm really excited about all of this, interest in this, because that's again what we need. And I'm very, very excited to say that for the advisory committee, we have representative of all of those major standards setters, the global associations, the professionals bodies, the universities, the business schools, companies, etc. Again, just to say, as I said in the start, we need to collaborate on this one. And so I just grateful to see all of these. And yes, it is early in the morning, so it's fantastic. It's a dream come true.
Wonderful. Peter.
I guess they go back to the question, the corporate consciousness officer, that person already exists in the form of the board, which is there to be the brain of the organization, the thing that is rationally determining how to go forward. And if you think about governance, the etymology of the word to govern is to steer. And it goes back to the Hellenic Greek times of steering a ship across very uncertain waters. So if we think about it in terms of the board, those at the governorship levels, steering the ship, and management are trimming the sails in response to the winds and the currents and so forth. And all of the others, all of the stakeholders, and by that I mean not just the sailors doing their work, but the stakeholders across the entirety, the employees as well as the customers, are keeping the ship pretty much in shape. So navigating, steering ships across uncertain waters is effectively what governance is about. And that conscious, rational center of gravity, that's provided, in fact, by the board of directors. In fact, that's what Mervyn was making reference to earlier on in the context of exercising and executing on the fiduciary obligation that directors have in organizations.
Peter, thank you. Carolyn, I don't know if you want to talk about the distribution model. I don't know how you want to wrap up, but over to you.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, we are a global organization. People can contact us through the website. If you go to the Good Governance Academy, we're very prominent there, and shortly we'll have our own website launched under ESG Exchange.info. So people can come and contact us there, but we will have in-country regional partners for people to be able to access and engage with their local organizations. We have got all of the big four on board, and we have already launched with our first stock exchange, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And IOSCO is looking at using the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as an example or proof of concept for other stock exchanges around the world. So that's from the distribution point of view. And I think Mervyn has a last point about what do you call this chief conscious officer?
Mervyn?
Well, in 2016, I wrote my book, Chief Value Officer, with the byline, Accountants Can Save the Planet. And that led to much discussion and debate, Bruce, as you can imagine. But it was an accountant, not as we know him or her today, sitting in a corner office and drafting the financial statements according to the IASB standards. It's an accountant who's changed. And again, at WITS, we've started at the School of Accountancy a course on becoming a CVO and learning about integrated thinking and etc. And I think if you look at companies, and we've got companies now listed on Johannesburg Stock Exchange that have CVOs, and underneath them they have Chief Financial Officer, Chief Sustainability Officer. So you really see the movement is moving towards looking at value. And we've moved away from profit at any cost, profit being subsidized by society and the environment, to a value creation model. Is this company really playing its part in society? And is it actually adding value? That's the critical issue. And the CVOs of the world will be focusing on that. And all I can say is universities around the world are starting to teach to become CVOs. And the oldest business school in the world, Audencia in France, has now launched the CVO MBA, which they've already graduated people. And so that is the start, Bruce, I think, of a whole change you can see in the thinking. And I've been in boards as an advisor, and I've seen that the accountant today is the true change maker that changes the thinking of the board, the whole thinking of the board. And they start asking the questions. This business judgment call we're about to make, will we continue to be seen to be creating value, but in a sustainable manner, for example? Several questions they start asking themselves. So I think it started, and but the how-to is becoming critical, and that's why we've taken the initiative at the GGA to form this global body with the global players involved, in order to make sure that the management have the duty to report on these things, really understand content, which is a moving feast, as I've tried to describe, and really learn how to. And that's why we're going to develop, and I use the word commonly used today, playbook.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Mervyn, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Panel, thank you very much. Greta Thunberg said it's enough time of blah, blah, blah. Perhaps it's time for do. We can get a whole choir going on that one. It's a little known fact, and I've been there and I've seen it myself. When Rodin sculpted The Thinker, he sculpted a second one called The Doer. And the plinth is still there, but that statue walked away and got very, very busy. The time for thinking has come. Much of the thinking has been done. It's an ever-evolving sphere, of course, as we know from accounting. Accounting standards change over time. ESG standards will change over time. It will evolve. But today is the day to go from the thinking to the doing. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us, to our wonderful panel. Thank you very much for your expert input. Harry, Hella, to bed, please. The rest of you, go to work. Thank you very much.